And just so you guys know, it's awesome when you start talking about how God blesses the church with so many different gifts and things. So pretty much everything that you see here comes from inside our church, which is really cool. In fact, the guys in the room, I don't want to embarrass them. Anyway, Martin does a killer job when it comes to... Martin's right here on the third row. I understand how it is, man. You weren't even looking up, and all of us were being mesmerized by the video, but listen, man, I go to small groups every week where we're talking about my sermon, so you can watch your video. Trust me, it's what's going on here? Somebody help my brother out. But it's so cool to see that when the church comes together, that God makes so many gifts, and seeing people using their gifts musically or in lots of other ways. So so glad that you're here. I want to, before we get into part 3 of the No More Religion series, certainly speak to, at least briefly, just what a week it's been, right? I know that so many people in our church, including some of my very good friends, have strong connections to Boston. And so I know some of you, I wasn't smart enough to get educated in Boston, but I know many of you got your education in Boston. Some of you grew up in that area. Some of you have worked in that area. Some of you, many of us have friends who have a Boston connection. But even if you don't have any personal connection to Boston, it's been quite a week to consider some things, hasn't it? Just to experience and to think about it. And here's what I think happens on a week like this, and I don't know if you feel the same, but on a week like this, it's very, sobering, I guess might be the best word to say it, to really begin to understand what matters most in life. But what I want is for weeks like this, not just to, yes, it makes me understand what's really important, and I'll talk about what I think that is in a moment, but I want the normal weeks of life to be spent realizing what's significant. Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to have a week like this so that you and I, this is significant, and this other thing that we give so much time and energy to isn't significant. Like in this week, I didn't really care how much money I had. This week, I really wasn't so concerned with what my hobbies were. This week, you probably didn't care if you were in entry-level position, if you were the chief executive or somewhere in between in your company. This week, my hope is that you began to sense, as many of us did, what really matters in life. And for me, it really boils down to a couple things. One is that there's a God who does exist. He gives tangible hope for us to lock into, and He invites us to know Him and to not just be some Sunday part of our life or the religious part of our life, but to be our life. And number 2, that this God puts us into a community like we have here at Epic. And I'm not talking about that from the pastor perspective. I'm talking about, our best friends are in this community. When I need something, I go to people in this community. When someone needs me, not just from the pastor, and it's because of the relationships that I've built in this community. And I hope that it doesn't take these kind of weeks for you and I to really understand what's significant. I hope that we go, wait a minute. Remember Jesus that day, there were over 613 commandments recognized by the scribes. 613 commandments in what we call our Old Testament, especially the first 5 books, okay? We'll talk about that later. But 613 commandments, and they tried to corner Jesus one day. And they said to Jesus this, Teacher, what's the greatest commandment, right? 613 of them, probably hard for him to choose his favorite, right? 613, what's the greatest one? Like the single greatest commandment, Jesus? Jesus says it's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength, depending on what your version says. But He didn't just give him the single greatest command. He gave him the second one too. And He said the second is like it. Really elevating the second one. Like just, it's like it. In what way, Jesus? Here's how it's like the first one. Because when you love God, you're also going to love your neighbor as yourself. And so out of 613 very important commandments to God, it wasn't that they weren't important, but He said, they were like, Jesus, narrow it down for us. Show us what really matters. What's most significant? It's like the reality of God in your lives and the reality of being attached to one another. And it's weeks like this where, for me, it's like, oh yeah, that's it. So many things I give my time and energy and focus to the rest of the year and rest of my life, if you can be honest as well, they just aren't as significant as we make them, are they? Don't make a lot of money. Be great at your job. Have lots of fun hobbies. But at the end of the day, we need to go, wait, what am I really giving my time attention and my focus to. And for this week for me, it was realizing those things. I was staying up late, I was watching Twitter and CNN and all this stuff unfold in Boston and in West Texas. And the crazy thing is this stuff's happening in our world every single week, right? Every single week in our world. I realize maybe not in our world, but in our world, every single week. And for me, it was a week it was a really busy week, but it was one of those weeks where it allowed me just to focus on what's important. As I'm sharing meals with friends that are dear to me this week, as I'm meeting a new couple in our church who's moved here who grew up in Romania and getting to interact with them. For me, I do a one-on-one monthly date with all 3 of my kids. It just so happened they were all this week. But don't worry about me. You're like, oh, poor dad. My kids are at that age now where they choose one-on-one dates that dad likes too, okay? So Monday is my off day. Monday I pick Sam up from school and he and I go to Dave & Buster's, so awesome. I'm like, all right, son, if we think we have to. There's nothing as so incredible as helping our kids distinguish between Chuck E. Cheese and Dave & Buster's, okay? It's just like, oh, this is awesome. And then Friday and Saturday, I got to take my other 2 sons to a couple of great wins down the street here at AT&T Park. I know there's some Padre fans in the room, but you have to be a fair weather fan, right? You can't just to say that you're with them when they're good. That's non-existent. And Corey and I are very good friends. And Corey, anyway, Giants are somewhere in his top 26 teams. So just one of those weeks, and even within our community, like people that were affected by Boston reaching out to me and just saying, hey, it really made me understand what's significant and talking about their life changes. The other night, maybe Thursday or Friday night, because of Shauna's investment in our boys' teachers, one of the teachers from a previous year sent Shauna a text message. Now, if I'm one of our boys, I don't want my teacher having my mom's phone number. But nonetheless, she sends a text message to Shauna because of the way Shauna's cared for her. And she says this: I've got an aunt who's basically dying. I know you know the Bible better than I do. Could you give me a verse that I could give to her? That all exists because of the way you love and care for people. There's a girl that joined our Epic community about 2 months ago. And pretty serious illness this week. And I'll be visiting her later this afternoon. But her parents came down from way out of state. And the first people they reached out to was this community. And you know why? Because she had attached herself to it. We always wonder, the staff, like how many other people in our city are hurting and they don't know we exist, therefore we don't know they exist. I don't mean individually, I mean they have not chosen to attach themselves to a community, but it's in these things that you realize this is not the pastor speaking this morning at this moment, okay? I will be in a second, I'll tell you what to do. Okay, it's coming. This is just me as a person who realizes when it all falls away, when really the rubber hits the road, what really matters is that there's a God who loves me and cares about me and has good intentions for my life, and there's a community that He's attached me to. Right? In weeks like this, it doesn't matter what the paycheck says. It doesn't matter what the bank account says. It doesn't matter if I'm climbing the ladder or not. In weeks like this, it's like, oh yeah, that's what God wants to be important. And so if you've not attached yourself to this community or one like it, if this doesn't work for you, I want to encourage you to do so really, really soon. Don't be the person, not for our benefit, but for yours, who just comes in and leaves and we never get to know you. And so when something happens to you, your parents don't even know that you're involved or attached to a community like this because you haven't. Okay? We don't want those crises to arise in our lives and they go, oh yeah, I need to do this. Like, we want to go, you know what? God, you've shown us what's most significant. Jesus said that it's this thing we have with you and it's this thing we have with each other. And let's give the best of ourselves to those 2 things. All right? Have fun, work hard, make a lot of money, all those things, whatever. But let's give the best of ourselves to these 2 things. And if we can help you here at Epic to do that, we'd love to be that community for you. We're continuing our No More Religion series today, and do you know what it's like when you're trying to prove that something's legitimate to one of your friends or to a colleague? You know how you try to find the closest expert to vouch for you? Do you know how this goes? Like, you're like, no, you got to listen to this person, or Google it, or go to Wikipedia, because this is 100% gospel truth. Just go there, and it'll show you that it's legit, and it's the right thing. Here's how it works in our family. Let's say that Shauna and I are upstairs. Our 3 boys are downstairs playing garage baseball. And if you're wondering what that is, exactly what you think, okay? It is baseball in the garage, nothing weird. We've got some rules that you need to know if you're going to compete against us. You need to know kind of what the home run line is on the garage door. It's at the window. You need to know we play 3 innings. There's 2 outs per inning. You need to know that Asher and I usually lose to the 2 oldest ones. That's just, and I'm okay with it. He gets a bit emotional. That's just how it goes. And so what they might do, if one of them doesn't understand the rule that the other two, and it's really interesting having 3 kids, there's always 2 on 1 in that moment. And so they might say, Dad, would you come down here? And so I go into the garage and like, hey, would you tell Asher that it's not a home run unless it hits the window at the garage door? Or they're like, or across this line, or Dad, listen, will you make sure Asher knows that 3 strikes he's out? Whatever it is, and they're bringing in me because they believe that when I step into the scene, that I speak with authority and expertise. But I'm a compassionate dad too, you know? And so we do that. If I begin telling you that Tim Milner, our executive pastor, is the funniest person I know when it comes to telling true stories, and you start to argue with me, and I'm telling you, no, I know it's hard to believe he's funnier than me. When telling true stories, I make up better stories, but when telling true stories, he's funnier than I am. He's the funniest guy on our staff or girl. He's the funniest person in our church when it comes to that. You're funny, I know. But Tim Milner is the funniest person. What I would say to you is this right here. If you don't think Tim's the funniest person in the world at telling true stories, ask him to tell one of these 2 stories. Ask him to tell you the tooth story. Anybody heard it? See? Or, lately, ask him to tell you the overnight flight getting wheezy story. Okay? And I'm vouching for me right here. People have heard this. All right? So Tim will take you out for coffee. Is Tim in the room? I can't see it. There's a post in the way. I'm going to pretend like it's not. And but so because that's what we do when we're trying to prove something. Like, no, here's the authority, here's the expert. Well, as we continue this No More Religion series where Paul's writing to these churches in Galatia, and remember, they're adding things to the gospel. We've learned the gospel message is this: grace alone from God, through faith alone, in Jesus alone. That's the gospel. But the Galatians have these false teachers invade their churches, and they're teaching them, no, you've got to do this, you've got to be circumcised, you've got to obey this commandment, and then you can be a follower of Jesus. What Paul's going to do, using the logic of the kind of thing I just said to you, he's going to tell the Galatians about a trip he took to Jerusalem. Why is he going to do that? Because guess where the epicenter of this Jewish life was? Come on, guess. All right. And so he's going to say, I went to Jerusalem, and guess what? They vouched for this same gospel message. And what he's trying to do with the Galatians is let them say, hey, if this is the thing that's true in Jerusalem, if they signed off on it, then you need to know that what I'm telling you is true. Does that make sense? In the exact way that I would tell you about Tim, or my kids would bring me in as the authority, you would bring a colleague and say, no, tell them the story. It's legit. Paul's going to say to the Galatians, I went to Jerusalem, and they signed off on the same message. He's trying to build his case to be believed. And so, we're in Galatians chapter 2. We're in Galatians for the whole series. If you need a Bible, lift your hand. We'll get you one. And we'll be on page 631 in those. For the rest of us, Galatians chapter 2. We'll be in verses 1 through 10. This is what we're doing in this No More Religion series. We're looking at this letter from Paul to a variety of churches in Galatia. And here's what had happened, in case you haven't been here for the first couple of weeks. What had happened is the false teachers had invaded these churches. And so they were getting up on some kind of platform like this, sitting down, and they were just saying, hey, you've got to get grace from Jesus, you've got to have faith in Jesus, but in addition to that, you've got to obey the law to become a follower of Jesus. You've got to be circumcised. That was a big thing that was going on in the Galatian community there in the churches. And so Paul, we've been just unpacking throughout this book, this idea that God brings grace and religion kind of brings this law thing that we have to do these things to get to God. So would you all stand with me as we look at Paul talking about his little, not a leisure trip, but definitely a business trip, for the kind of business he was in. So we're leaving off where we left in chapter 1, and here goes verse 1 of chapter 2. Paul writes this about his trip. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up because of a revelation and set before them, though privately before those who seemed influential, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure I was not running or had not run in vain. But even Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, though he was a Greek. Yet because of false brothers secretly brought in, who slipped in to spy out our freedom that we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might bring us into slavery, to them we did not yield in submission even for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you. And from those who seem to be influential, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Those, I say, who seemed influential added nothing to me. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised, for he who worked through Peter for his apostolic ministry to the circumcised worked also through me for mine to the Gentiles. And when James and Cephas and John, who seemed to be pillars or leaders, perceived the grace that was given to me, they gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. Only they asked us to remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. You may be seated. To be honest, I've never taught this text explicitly, and so when you go through a book like Galatians and you're teaching every verse, you come across things you haven't taught maybe in a topical way before. But before you get bored with this idea of a meeting in Jerusalem, I want you to understand the implications that this meeting has for us 2,000 years later. It may not seem like there's even a connection and point there, but here's what's happening. Paul goes up to Jerusalem to set before the Jewish leaders the gospel message as he understood it. Okay? And the reason why this was huge, so he's going to set before them the gospel message. It's the one that Jesus gave him, and it's the one that we as a church were learning to embrace, and I hope you're learning to love, and just to be astounded by the reality that there's the God who at great cost to himself gives his perfect Son for imperfect us to somehow cleanse us and bring us into a reconciled relationship with him. I hope you're learning that. I hope you're setting down religion and learning to embrace the grace of the gospel message that God gives us. And so Paul is setting this before them, the one that he got from Jesus. The reason it's huge and why he's telling the Galatians this is he's at the epicenter of Jewish life, the place where the movement's going to begin in the first century. And Paul begins to tell them that I wanted to make sure I was not running in vain. Now, Paul is not saying, though it might seem like he is not saying that I wanted to make sure I had the gospel right. And the reason he's never doubting the gospel is because Jesus appears before Paul, and Jesus gives Paul this gospel. You will not see Paul doubting the gospel message in his letters. You will not see Paul doubting it. So he's not saying that. But what he's saying is, I wanted to make sure I wasn't running in vain, because if they have a different gospel message than I have, and we're both supposed to go spread this movement, them to the Jews, me to the Gentiles, guess what happens if we don't have the same message? Their time, their energy, their focus now is trying to convince one another who's actually right, and they're not able to spread out and go pursue the things that each of them have been called by God to pursue. One to the Gentiles, one to the Jews. Does that make sense? And so you're like, Ben, what does this have to do with Epic Church, April 21st, 2013? Well, we may still be sitting here, but we know the movement, if it had not got off on the right foot in the first century, things would have been delayed or changed drastically. Does that make sense? If they had come away from there, Paul going, oh, the Jews don't think that what I'm saying is true because they had influence, just like Paul had influence, then you would see them fighting, or basically you'd all of a sudden have two different religions, two different forms of Christianity. Now, people make up different forms of Christianity all the time, but this was like in the beginning, the people who had the influence. So what Paul wants the Galatians to know is, hey, I went to Jerusalem and listened to my experience there, because he believes that the Galatians know that it was signed off on in Jerusalem, that it's a legit thing. Kind of the example I was giving you guys a second ago. Like they would bring legitimacy to what Paul is trying to communicate with his words. And then you see in verse 3, it says that they did not even make Titus get circumcised. You see that in verse 3? You're like, okay, Ben, I don't know. I mean, this is my first church thing. This is Galatians. I've never read. Like, why the circumcision thing? Here's what's going on. These false teachers are coming in and saying, yes, Jesus has shown up. Yes, he gives grace. Yes, you need faith in him. But in addition to receiving grace, and in addition to placing your faith in him, you've got to do all of these other things. And for them, circumcision became this major ordeal. You will see Paul get more passionate about this subject. You're like, I've never seen anyone so passionate about circumcision. It doesn't exist. The reason that he's so passionate is because if the gospel has additives, and it begins to get proclaimed and even lived out in that way, then what else could be added in people's life, right? Or in their churches. They could just keep adding more and more and more. And all of a sudden, we get weighed down because we know we can't do all of these things for God's acceptance to come to us. And Paul's passionate about it. He's going to get so passionate about the circumcision thing, okay? He's going to be so passionate about it that he's going to get to a place to say to the Galatians, if you think that circumcision gets you closer to God, why don't you go ahead and emasculate yourself completely? You're like, that's in the Bible? Yeah. It's a very interesting book. But the idea Paul's going, he's like, hey, if you think cutting a little bit will get you a standing with God, just cut it all off. Yes, that's in the Bible. No, I'm not the liberal pastor you think I am. His point is this. If that gets you to God, then just keep going all the way, because you'll really get a great standing with God. Now, somebody might go, like, why would they do circumcision? The same reason that you would, okay? Listen. You're like, well, that just seems painful. Listen, all of us are like the Galatians in this way. We would love for God to say, do this one thing and you're in. We would read books on it. We would go to training courses on it. We would see if the Princeton Review had a training course for it. We would figure out a way to master it. We would give ourselves wholeheartedly to it. And once we did whatever the one thing God called us to do, we would rejoice, and we probably would not have our lives affected there from that point on to the future. Why? Because we thought that we had done what we needed to do for God to be appeased, and we would be good. Circumcision painful? Yes. The pain will go away, and you won't have to do anything else. You'll be good with God, and He cares. And so what Paul says to them is, look, Titus, not even Titus. He's this Greek, right? Not a Jew, obviously. Not even Titus was forced to be circumcised. And then in verse 4, if you look at that, Paul begins to bring this theme. Not only is circumcision the only theme in Galatians, which I'm glad for, but another theme is this slavery and freedom theme. It shows up all throughout Galatians. Some really cool stuff coming up, especially once we get to chapter 5. You're going to see what this freedom in Christ is all about. But he talks about it a little bit in verse 4. Now, he's not talking about these Jewish leaders when he said someone came to secretly, basically spy out our freedom and make us slaves again. He's talking about these people that came into the fold. They were a lot like what the Galatian teachers were sharing, and they tried to spy out or end our freedom that we had in Christ. Here's a principle that's all throughout this book, and really all throughout the Bible, and all throughout this series. Here it is. The gospel brings freedom, while religion brings slavery. If you haven't been here for the last couple of weeks, the way we define religion in this sense, not that all religion is bad, but the idea of religion being that is if we do these things and this good enough, that somehow we'll eventually work our way up to God and get accepted. Okay? That's the component of religion that we're talking about. That God has a standard. If we can appease Him, then we get in. Right? But what we've been saying is that, that's not the gospel message. The gospel message is you can't appease God, and so God initiates, God acts, God comes to you. And He offers grace and mercy and forgiveness and death on the cross of an innocent man so that you might have access and be reconciled to God. Religion will always bring about slavery because you always want to know, have I done enough? And so you're just putting on the chains, right? You're like, oh, God, I just got to keep doing it and do it. And what it does is it ends in slavery. It will always end in slavery. Trying to just appease God because you can't. You can't do it. And so a question I want you to ask yourself is this. Are you carrying a weight in your spiritual life that God never intended for you to carry? Have you added something? Are you carrying a weight on your shoulders and God never meant for you to carry it? He never did. Some people, and perhaps you're in the room if you think like this, some people think, and a lot of people actually, think that God's some big killjoy. That somehow to become a Christian is to be handcuffed by God. Right? That if you're going to follow Jesus, you got to put the handcuffs on. Right? That God's going to take away all the fun, all the pleasure, all the enjoyment of life. You've got to put the handcuffs on. That couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, what's actually real is the opposite of that. Here's what actually happens. As you embrace the life and the gospel that God has for you, the handcuffs don't come on. They come off. You don't lose freedom, maybe in one sense, but you gain what really is freedom. Does that make sense? So not only is it sort of wrong, it's completely opposite. That this life that God offers us, it doesn't handcuff us. It undoes the handcuffs. It undoes the ties, right? And so we have this freedom. But as we have this freedom, and especially in this church, I need to say what I'm about to say because I want to make sure that you and I understand what freedom in Christ looks like as we go along. And here's what you need to know. The freedom we have in Christ is not a freedom to disobey Him. I feel like this is important in our church at the stage kind of that we're at right now. The freedom that Christ gives us. So when you hear the freedom word, you're like, I love freedom. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. Right? We live in this very individualistic world where I want to do what I want to do, and you need to be okay with that. Right? But the freedom that Christ gives us is not this freedom to live for self. And of course, the freedom Jesus gives us could never be the freedom to live contrary to what He wants out of our lives. Doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but He's not going to say, here's the freedom, go do whatever you want. And some of us like the freedom Jesus, but we don't like the other Jesus. And I just want to make sure, as I take my responsibility serious as your teacher, you can't have both. Doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Here's why. At the moment that Jesus becomes your Savior who brings you freedom, He simultaneously becomes your Lord and King. And I realize some of you are hearing this for the very first time. So let me say it again. At the moment that you get forgiveness, mercy, and grace that you want, simultaneously He's becoming your King. And some of you are like, oh, He's a good King. He's a King that knows what's best for you. But yeah, He's a King. This summer we're going to look at the Gospel of Mark in a series we're entitling The Kingdom, because in Mark, he writes through this lens of looking at what it means for Jesus' kingdom to come into our life, and what it looks like for Jesus to be the King, and then how it's probably counterintuitive to how many of us are living. And so we really look at what does it look like for Him to be King and for us to be active participants in this kingdom. If that makes sense. So simultaneously, because here's what we have to realize, that grace, there's two sides to the grace coin, and many of us only like one side. We all love the side where we don't have to pay the penalty for our sins. Please tell me you like that side. Right? We all love the side where we get cleansed. We all love the side where we don't have to make our past dictate our future. We all love that side. That's the grace of Jesus, and it's legit. It's 100% true. But it's not the whole thing. Because the other side of grace is this, that the grace that frees us from sin also empowers us to live holy lives. Not to get to God, but because in Jesus, God has already accepted us. So, when it comes to how you do relationships, Jesus is King of that. You're not free to do relationships however you want if He's your King. When it comes to your finances, when it comes to your sexuality, when it comes to where you land on the pride or humility scale, when it comes to where you're at on the spectrum of selfishness or unselfishness, when it comes to whether or not you're generous or stingy, we don't have the freedom to live however we want. Now, we're all in process. But the question I have for people, listen, we're all just about taking our next steps. That's our really a slogan for us here, a mantra for us here at Epic. The question is, as you take the next step and you come face to face with Jesus being King and asking you to shift or change or give up or add something that He wants for your life, will you be willing to do it? Not to gain acceptance, but in response to, wow, the Bible tells me that Jesus paid a significant price and I belong to Him. In our world today, we don't want to belong to anyone. And again, if you have a skewed vision of Jesus, then that might sound terrible. But if you have the view of Jesus where this perfect man died for those of us who aren't, the great cost to Himself, laid down His life, the Bible says He gave Himself up for you. If that's the view you have, then you're like, oh, I'll gladly follow. I know it's a tough message. Freedom in Christ would never lead us to live contrary to Him. Right? And none of us have arrived yet either, though, have we? We need that grace to do both things. To forgive us and to cleanse us. To not to hold us responsible for our sin, which is amazing. We also need to empower us to live a life pleasing to God. Not to gain God's acceptance, right? Get the cause and effect right. But because we've been given in Jesus God's acceptance. Okay? All right, I'm trying to come up with a joke. Got a lot of serious faces looking at me. It's a big piece for us. Because I want you to know that His grace does forgive. But it also empowers. It also empowers. In verses 7 through 9, you have this really beautiful thing that Paul and Peter begin to see, that the same God works in all of our lives. Do you see it? Look at verse 7. It says, Paul says that they understood that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, or the Gentiles, and that Peter had been entrusted with the gospel for the circumcised, or the Jews. Verse 8 says, God works in His ministry, and He works in my ministry, And at the end it says, they gave me the right hand of fellowship, verse 9, that we should go to the Gentiles, they to the circumcised. So you have this beautiful expression from Paul. Here it is. That the same God is using the same gospel message, the same Christianity, the same universal church to advance His kingdom in lots of different ways, using lots of different people. Isn't that beautiful? So the greatest potential we have in the church is not for me to become a better preacher. The greatest potential we have in the church is not for Tim to handle our finances and administrative ability in the best way he can. The greatest potential for our church isn't for Lindsay to learn the secrets of discipleship in small groups, and Brad to learn worship and praise to understand kids ministry. The greatest potential we have as a church is for every one of us, say it with me, every one of us to understand that we have a part in this. Here's the clarifying vision for us as Epic Church, just so we all know what we're after here as a church. I hope it's clarifying at least. The vision of Epic Church is to see an increasing number of people in San Francisco orient their entire lives around Jesus. If I'm up here 30 years from now, and I hope that I am, we will continue to be about that. Helping people orient their entire, don't miss the word entire. We're going to reject the Sunday theme. We're going to reject that we invite God in just to the categories of our lives and compartments that we want Him to come in. We're going to seek to orient our entire lives around Jesus. So, here's what we want to see as a church that we can't do alone. It takes all of us. We want to see executives throughout our city learn what it means to practice their role and their job as a person orienting their life around Jesus. We want to see young families raise kids with this idea in mind. We want to see you live relationally, sexually, in your marriages with this idea. We want it to affect every single compartment of your life. Like, man, that seems like a long way away for me too. But I want it to be holistic. I want it to be holistic because God has implications for every area, every arena of life. There's implications because we're Christ followers. For those of you that are just thinking about the faith thing, we just want you to know that, hey, it's not a boring once-a-week thing. It is this 24/7 deal that we're seeking to see what God has for every arena of our lives. And so what your role is and my role is, all of us, not as a pastor, just a person in this community, is to go, hey, here's the question. Who has God called you to reach with the gospel? And you're like, oh, Paul's got this, like, all the Gentiles. And Peter's got all the Jews. Man, I don't think I've got this huge thing. I'm going to give you some questions that will help you understand who God wants you to reach with this gospel message. Here's some questions that will help you understand. Where do I live? Yes, San Francisco, but more explicitly. What neighborhood do I live in? What building do I live in? Who are my neighbors? Where do I work or go to school? Will help you answer this. What are my passions? With whom has God given me influence? As a Christian, the Bible says that all of us at least have one spiritual gift. So what are my spiritual gifts? One that we don't like to share too much, but God uses in profound ways. Or what in my past has been painful? Remember, God doesn't want to waste our pain. So there's all kinds of questions like that. What are my hobbies can be a question. And so what the beauty of what could be here for us at Epic is if all of us are understanding this gospel message increasingly more and more, and we're understanding and leveraging the places God has put us and the relationships He's put us in to advance this kingdom. This is what it was for Peter and Paul, and we could be like, oh, they saw Jesus. They did. Then they had these huge things. I mean, Paul's planning 20-something churches, and Peter, oh my gosh, he's like the eternal pope, and I'm not going to be that. God's not asking you to be that. God's asking you to be you, live a life transformed by this gospel, and leverage your life in such a way that you advance the gospel to the people God's called you to advance it to. And then we end this text in verse 10, which fits perfectly with it being the last verse we read before we get into the Serve the City event. Paul says this in verse 10. He says, the only thing they asked us to do was to remember the poor, the very thing we were eager to do. And in studying for this, the big idea, the reason the Jerusalem churches asked Paul this, the Jerusalem churches were much poorer than the churches in Galatia. So it was a big deal. But Paul was eager to do it, not because his Galatian churches were poor. He was eager to do it because he understood the implications of this gospel message he's proclaiming. And so he wanted to leverage his life for people who didn't have what he had. And we're going to have that opportunity next Sunday. Some of you are out of town, I know that. But you guys need to be here if you can. Let me give you a few reasons why. You need to be a part of what it looks like for Epic Church to come together and serve our city. You need to be a part of blessing the people next Sunday morning. And even if you're like, Ben, I'm just selfish. That doesn't resonate with me at all. If you just only care about your own spiritual growth, you need to change your calendar to be there next Sunday. If you're just like, Ben, all I care about is me getting better. Enough, fine. This will make you better. This is what God's called us to do. Lindsay told me this morning there's already 135 adults, I believe, signed up to do this. I know you've got a great experience. Some of you have events. My own family has some events they cannot miss out on. I will be there. Some of you are out of town. I get all that. Some of you have people coming in. You need to bring them with you. Now, you're not going to have to do everything. Like I've been told, I don't have to do the manicure thing. For their sake, not mine, I'm sure. But we want to be a church that realizes God has called us not to live unto ourselves, to make a difference in the neighborhoods we live in, at the office that we live in the industry that we work in, and in our city. We will not be traveling far. Every time I have a meeting over there, I'll walk there, meaning that it's close enough that we need to be effective. So, I want to pray for us. Brad and Mary are going to come up and sing a song that will be new to our community here. And if you want to stand and sing along with them, if you just want to listen up, let me go ahead and drop the lights, and I just want to pray. It's a beautiful message, and I would invite you to listen in as you catch on. I think you will simply catch on pretty quickly. And I hope this will resonate with you, that God is building something beautiful. But at every step along the way, as individuals and for us as a church and you and your relationships, we have to go, will we continue to yield ourselves to this God who's writing this great story throughout history and eternity, including in your life and my life and our church. So I hope you'll jump in and lean in. And maybe your response to this is you need to embrace the other side of grace and realize you're not just getting off the hook with your sin and the consequences, but you need to embrace that Jesus is King and that changes how you live. The great thing is that the Jesus who expects things from us is the one who empowers us to live that way. Some of you just need to sign up for Serve the City and let the chips fall where they may once you get there. You need to overcome a fear. You need to set aside time. You need to change your schedule. I don't know. And then others of us need to attach ourselves more deeply to this community. If something happened with you, you got ill this week, you needed something. You needed someone who had been through a struggle because you're going through it. If you don't attach yourself, you won't know any of this. You need to have phone numbers of people in this room. You need to have email addresses. You need to interact in person with people if you want to attach yourself to this community. So God, I'm just going to pray that you will make us the kind of community, God, not perfectly, but God, I'm going to pray that you would make us the kind of community that rallies around this gospel message and realizes its implications. God, the potential of our church is beautiful. But God, only as each one of us yield ourselves to you and realize you've got a unique thing for all of us. God, I pray this season of our church will be unprecedented as far as seeing the stories lived out, seeing us yield to you. God, really make us passionate about the things that matter, and may we set aside the things that are insignificant. In Jesus'